Hello, everybody. This is Vanessa Keenan, and I am here. Oh, I think maybe I just went live now. Hey, everybody. This is Vanessa Keenan. I'm about to start the webinar on how to create patterns that wow. This is my first time using Google Hangout, so I hope everything runs smoothly. I tested out last night, so I think we should be okay. So I have lots to cover. I want to share with you what I've learned and studied over the years about patterns, and I'm a little bit worried maybe I made the presentation too long, so we're going to jump right into it so I don't run out of time and keep you guys here all day, because if you're like where I'm from, it's super nice today and you probably want to head outside. Make sure you grab a pen and paper because there's going to be lots of great stuff for you guys to keep track of. So now I'm going to head over to my presentation, and you will not see me anymore, but you'll see my presentation. Just give me a second here. Oh, maybe I did something funny here already. Okay, I hope you guys can see this still. Whoops, jumping around here. All right, so first of all, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. I started synchro when I was 7 in Summerside, PEI, and that's in Canada here. Swimming lessons was way too easy for me, so the lifeguard, who is also the synchro coach, suggested I try synchro. The first practice that I watched, I saw a whole bunch of older girls doing foot first skull. My brain was desperately trying to figure out how they did that. I was instantly hooked. We ended up moving to Alberta, where I joined Nova Synchro, and then I moved up to the national levels with the Auroras, and my last year swimming, we came actually second at Canadian Nationals. Then I went to school during my last season of swimming at the University of Alberta, where I took a bachelor's degree in physical education. I specialized in sport performance. Then I went on to get a master's in arts, which specialized in coaching. While I was doing my master's degree, I also started my level 4 coaching degree in Canada here, which is one of the highest designations you can get. Coaching experience, well, I coached mostly national level athletes, but I've also coached all the way from beginner to masters. Some of my highlights have been coaching Team Alberta 3 times, coaching Canada's 13 to 15 national team, and also taking a team over to the Christmas prize in Prague. Currently, I am consulting with clubs and individuals, and I am coaching masters again this year. I am a blogger, as many of you probably already know, at the Online Synchro Coach.com, and I blog on various synchro topics. And thank you for all the support so far that I've gotten. When I first started the blog, I really thought no one would read it, but to my surprise and delight, you've reached out with kind words, and you guys still follow me, so thank you. I also wrote a synchronized swimming pattern book. I really wrote it because I was tired of writing all my patterns out year after year. Wanted an easy way to have access to the patterns and pattern changes I often used. And then to top it off, I wanted to streamline the coaching process and let the coaches focus on the art of coaching and not trying to figure out what patterns to use, rather figure out what cool things to do when they're in the patterns. All right, so the meat of this presentation and why you're all here is how to create patterns that wow. So when I created this presentation for you, I envisioned 2 ways for you to think about it. The first way is you may be learning many of these concepts for the first time, so I'm your teacher. On the other hand, you may have lots of experience, so you're watching this as the teacher so you can teach your students. Whichever hat you're wearing, I'm sure you'll find some value in this webinar. So there's 3 main sections I'd like to cover today. The first section is coaching using pattern grids. This is a concept that I realized I subconsciously use when I'm making up my routines, and I hope it'll help some of you see your patterns differently. Secondly, we'll be covering 10 considerations when choreographing pattern changes. These are some of the more common suggestions I have for coaches when I watch their routines. And the last section brings it back to what the top performers are doing and gives us an idea of what we may want to try out with our teams. So that's international trends in patterns and pattern changes. All right, pattern grids. Okay, so we're stepping back into math class just a little bit here. First, think of the pattern grid as having a horizontal line and a vertical line, like when you did graphing back in the day. Now in this diagram, I've placed the pool in there because really it's not math class, this is a synchro class. So the dive in is at the top of our page, and then the coach would typically stand at the side where it says vertical. Now think of this pool as having a grid on it. It's kind of similar to maybe the lines that run across the pool, but a lot more of them, okay? I really hope that you're still with me. Okay, now we're going to lose the horizontal and vertical labels. And I really want you to note that I have pivoted the pool to be from the coach's view. So the viewpoint from your computer screen should be your viewpoint from the side of the pool. I do like using the horizontal and vertical labels for naming patterns, but that's a discussion for another time because we have lots and lots to cover today. So for now, we'll just be focusing on the pattern grid part. More importantly with the grid is the positioning of your swimmers on the grid. So you can see here with the blue arrows, from one line to one line is one position. So like swimmers 1 and 5, they are one position away. This spacing is similar to lanes on the bottom of a pool. You can also have half positions. So that would be like swimmers 2 and 4 where the green arrows are pointing. Those swimmers are in a half position away from each other. And again, if swimmers are 2 lines away, then that's 2 positions away. In this particular pattern, there's no swimmers that are 2 full positions away. This entire pattern, just going from the dive in to the opposite end of the pool, only takes up 1.5 positions. I typically only label the positions from the viewpoint of the coach and the judge. I don't go the other way because visually that doesn't take up as much room as if they're taking up going from the dive in to the other end of the pool. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some examples of exactly how this works. So the top pattern is a 2-2-2, and that's the starting pattern. The 2 lines at the bottom are the final pattern. Okay, so this pattern change is occurring from left to right. And I wanted to show you how the positions move down the pool with everybody on the team who's going to be moving, okay? Oh, I heard maybe you guys can't see. I'm going to try something here. See if we can't get it so you guys can see again. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think I might have got the visual back up for you, but just not the version I want here. So let me just, like I said, I'm new to this. So let me just try to get a better one. Whoops, no, don't want to flip the screen. Here. I think I know what I did wrong. Oops. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, Kadisha, text me if you think if this is still working, okay? Because I did something different again. You know what, maybe I'll back up just quickly, just so you guys can see, since I didn't show you maybe any of the visuals that I had created for you. So I'll go through it quickly since you already heard me. So this is the pattern grid. So there's the vertical and horizontal line, like math class. And then next we have, I put the pool in there. So the dive in is at the top. And now I put a grid on there, like I talked about a little bit earlier. So here's the grid into the pool. And then, so now this is the viewpoint that I guess you weren't seeing, but now you can see. So I've swapped it so you can see the grid like we normally see when we're coaching our athletes. And then this was the position to position. So you can see swimmer 1 and 5, they're a full position away. Swimmers 2 and 4 at the green arrows, they're a half a position. So this whole pattern only takes up 1.5 positions in total. So the back two, 1 and 2, to swimmers in the front 7 and 8, they only take up 1.5 positions in total. I don't tend to worry too much about measuring the other way, just because visually it seems like the other direction takes up more space. Okay, so here's the diagram that I was talking about, and now you can see. So in our top pattern, all swimmers are moving in this whole pattern change. So we have swimmers 3, 4, 7, and 8, the blue swimmers. They're going to be moving a half a position to get to the final pattern in the bottom. And then the other swimmers, swimmers 1, 2, 5, and 6, so the green circles, they have to move a total of 1 position to get to their next spot. Okay, and then that gets them to the 2 line. This is why some moving pattern changes are so challenging, because in this pattern, swimmers are moving either a half or 1 position, but the more moving an entire pattern does, the more moving the people that actually have to pattern change move. Yeah, so it takes more time to execute, and then there's more propulsion needed by the pattern changers, okay? Here's another example for you. So it's a common pattern change from a rocket at the top into 2 diagonal lines. So in this diagram, swimmers 1, 5, 7, they have to move a total of 1.5 positions to get to their 2 lines. And swimmers 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8 are moving a half a position. In this pattern change, everyone is moving, but if swimmers 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8 are blue, if they're only swimming on the spot and they're stationary, the pattern change is only 1 position. However, if they move more than a half a position, then the green swimmers have another 0.5 to move. So they have full 2 positions to move, and that is a lot of moving for your team, okay? So really keep that in mind when you're choreographing your pattern changes. Once you get past like 1.5, 2, 2.5 positions for people to pattern change, it's going to take you longer, and you're going to need to have really strong swimmers to actually be able to execute that pattern change. So again, we have a 1.5 position move. So swimmer 8, the green swimmer, she has to move 1.5 positions. All of the swimmers in blue in the bottom, they're only moving a half a position. However, if the team moved a full position instead of a half a position, then swimmer 8 would need to travel 2 full positions. And that can create a lack of flow in your routine, right? Because perhaps swimmer 8 is not a strong swimmer and it takes them a little bit longer to get there. So you want to have really quick, efficient pattern changes. So I know we kind of covered the pattern grid fairly quickly. So make sure in the comment section, or you can send me an email. I would love to know what you thought of this pattern grid system. Did it make sense? Was it helpful? Perhaps I confused you. I sure hope not. Anyways, I'd love to get some feedback, as you were the first group ever to hear my concept of swimming in a grid for patterns. And I won't go through the comments right now, but after this presentation, I'll look at all the comments and then I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have, okay? Okay, let's move on to the 10 considerations for pattern changes. So these are in no particular order, but number 10, all pattern changes must be logical. Swimmers must always swim to the position that visually makes the most sense, even if the pattern change is underwater, okay? Water is transparent, so underwater work is important. Remember, the judges can still see underwater. Okay, on this slide, I have 2 options for a pattern change from a 3-2-3 to a 2-2-2 pattern. Now, some of you are probably shaking your head, no way for one of the options, but I kid you not, I still see both of these options being used. In my opinion, and the best option is the only option out of these two is option 2. Why? Well, see how in option 2, 4 swimmers move as a group to the next pattern while 4 swimmers maintain their pattern. So we have the blue swimmers, they just move diagonally up and then they get to that new pattern. Whereas in the option 1, there was people kind of swimming all over the place. So it didn't make very much sense, okay? For coaches that don't know the best ways for some of these pattern changes, there are many patterns that have these optimal ways to pattern change, and then there's a few ways that you can learn them. One way is to watch high-level teams or clubs, because most of them are doing all of these pattern changes anyways. You can watch YouTube videos and write out the pattern changes. In the pattern book I have written, I have some common pattern changes that are written out as well. Right now, if you subscribe to my newsletter, you get pattern changes for teams of 10, so combo. And then often to my newsletter group, I send out free pattern changes from the top routines in the world. So on a final note with this, learn and choreograph optimal pattern changes. It needs to look logical so you can maintain the flow of your routine at all times. And remember, they can see underwater, so things that don't make sense can be seen still. 9, use patterns that already have swimmers positioned optimally for highlights. For example, patterns that have most swimmers as close to their position for the highlight. It is sometimes a spot, but I encourage you to avoid swimmers doing random switches underwater to get in highlights. It can cause confusion. It breaks the flow in the routine. It could cause collisions. And even at new competition pools, some swimmers might get lost and end up in the wrong position to begin with because it doesn't make sense under there. Here are some good patterns for highlights that make most swimmers close to gathering for one big highlight. I feel like number 2, 3, 6, and potentially number 4 would be really good patterns for doing 2 highlights. Basically, you can try and make any pattern work, but always keep in mind that there are better options than others. So if you can pick a better pattern for a highlight, then your swimmers will get there faster and there won't be as much dead time before the highlight goes off, okay? Eight, choose small patterns to move to after a highlight. A 3 position or smaller pattern is ideal. So this comes back to patterns on the grid. After a highlight, patterns that are too long will take too long to get to and could break the flow and effortlessness of your routine. Let's look at these options. The top pattern, it takes up about 1.5 positions in total. And the bottom pattern change from a highlight takes 4 positions. Again, it can take more time to execute the bottom pattern change from a highlight, and that is why I suggest most teams stick to the 3 position or less pattern change. Often the girls on the bottom of the highlight, it takes them a lot longer to get up to the patterns. So if you have this 4-person, like the 2-line pattern after a highlight, we might be waiting and waiting and waiting for your swimmers to get there before they surface. Now, having said that, the next consideration will help you get around this one a little bit. If a pattern after a highlight is greater than 3 positions, experiment different timing for the swimmers to surface. This will hide the swimmers still swimming to the pattern. Doing this will help maintain the flow of your routine and the pattern change. I like to call this type of choreography synchronization options. And again, I've included this in part of my book as well. So in the top example, the swimmer's labeled 1, surface or move first, then swimmers labeled 2, join in. And often the person being thrown can surface right away while the bottom swimmers are still swimming up. So probably one of the people being thrown is probably in the 1, and the people on the bottom of the feet or on the waist are probably swimmers number 2 because they're taking them a while to get up there. In the bottom example, which is a 4 position pattern, I've made synchronization options for 4 groups of 2. Again, it depends the type of highlight that you're doing in your routine as to what combination you want to do. But for the bottom one, I just have number 1s coming up, number 2, number 3s, and then number 4s, okay? There are so many synchronization options that you can use. So just make sure whatever you choose to use, that it maintains the flow of your routine and that it actually makes sense to the audience and the judges. The judges and audience only get one shot to look at your routine. So if it doesn't make sense right away, I'd suggest probably looking at a different option. Number 6, utilize swimmer optimization in patterns when possible. I gave this a very technical term, but what it really means is knowing where the best spots are to put strong and not so strong swimmers. In these diagrams, the positions in blue are the positions that I feel draw attention first. Then the green positions draw attention, and then the black ones kind of not so much. However, at any time someone makes a huge synchronization, pattern, or execution error, the judge's eyes are going to be drawn right to that position regardless of where they are in pattern. Usually, the middle of the pattern is where the eyes are drawn first if there are no mistakes happening. In the rocket pattern, the green position can be noticeable when the team performs egg beater. Always try to put a strong egg beater swimmer in that position because that position does stand out in the rocket, even though it's kind of on the side. Sometimes you're going to try to optimize swimmer position due to height and not necessarily weaknesses. Like in a line, you don't want to have your shortest leg swimmer in the middle by a swimmer with the longest legs. So if possible, take a look at where you are placing your swimmers. Optimize your swimmer placement when and if you can, but don't break other rules like having logical pattern changes to make this one work. Because reality, most of us coach teams that are, a little bit all over the place. We don't have the luxury of having 8 swimmers that are identical height and same leg length, and even at that, people swim at different heights, right? So remember this. If you can try to accommodate that in your routine, go for it. Just remember that you need things to be logical still, okay? Five, patterns that are only understandable on the straight or across the pool should only be swum either straight or across the pool. I'm actually surprised how often this consideration is ignored. Patterns always need to make sense to the judges or you won't get credit for them. In fact, you could lose synchronization and even execution scores. Here are 4 patterns that should never go on the angle as is, okay? So what I mean by that is often people will pick a pattern, maybe not one of these patterns, but a pattern on the straight, and then they just pivot the shoulders to the angle to make maybe a new pattern, but these particular patterns are very confusing by just turning the shoulders. You could try pivoting the entire pattern to the angle, but with these particular patterns, they don't necessarily work out quite as well as other patterns. The only one that could work is number 3, okay? But the other ones only work on the straights, should never be shown on the angle. Okay, so I just threw in there another term, pattern check, and I want to double check that everybody's on the same page as me as what I think a pattern check is. So for me, a pattern check is where swimmers can check on the horizontal and vertical to be in pattern. I like the swimmers to use their arms, so in this case, the lines, to check the swimmers on the angles, and then they use their eyes to check the swimmers on the horizontal and vertical. So you can see with a pattern when they're swimming on the straight, it's very easy for them to check their pattern. Now I've pivoted, or we're going to pretend that the swimmers have pivoted their shoulders to look towards the blue arrow. And remember, this is a pattern that I think only works on the horizontal and vertical. You can see now that we have their shoulders turned, there's not really a great way for them to check this pattern with their arms, right? So if they're facing and they want to put their arms out in the angle to check their pattern, they're not really going to hit anybody. They could touch hands, I suppose, but I prefer the touching the back of the shoulders. So that's why I don't like using patterns like this, because most of us don't teach the best of the best in the world. So we can't afford to have swimmers trying to figure out what they're doing. It's also trickier when you turn everyone the angle, because everyone sees the angle differently. So there's going to be a lot more work for you to nitpick this to make it look like it's a pattern. Oh, I skipped a page here on myself. What did I do? Oh, sorry, I just jumped too far ahead. Okay. Number 4, add variety by incorporating on the angle to on the angle pattern changes. This is an easy way to get variety in the routine. So you can just take the pattern changes that you like on the straight and then just throw them angle to angle. Angle to angle changes are more difficult, so make sure ahead of time that you think your team can handle it. And we'll take a look at an example here. In this example, we're going from 2 lines to a rocket on the angle. This is very simple yet effective. So swimmers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, they're going to move up as a group, while swimmers 4, 7, and 8 maintain their pattern. And you can see, boom, they just move up right into that new pattern. So again, picking up those optimal pattern changes and testing them out, right? Can we do this one if we're facing on the angle? Can we do this onto the angle, all right? Three, use a variety of pattern changes types. So I'm going to give you the 4 types of pattern changes I like to consider. Okay, so underwater pattern change. This would be swimming from one section to another section completely underwater. So that often happens from a highlight into a surface, or after a figure into the next pattern change. Those would be underwater pattern changes. On the surface pattern change, that's when the heads are out of the water at the start of the pattern change and they end out of the water at the end of the pattern change. This would be, I would say, the second hardest of the pattern changes to do. Underwater is the easiest. The third one, in a hybrid / figure pattern change. I slashed figure because I believe internationally in routines, the underwater work is called hybrid. In Canada, often we just call it a figure. So anyways, that just for the Canadian folks out there, figure and hybrid, they're the same thing to us Canadians, if that makes any sense. So this is while performing a hybrid or a figure, a pattern change is executed. So this is the hardest one to do because now we're upside down, we're swimming from one pattern to the next pattern, okay? As surfacing pattern change is the last one. This is a very uncommon pattern change, but I do see it internationally from time to time. This is where a team gets into the next pattern as they're surfacing. So the team usually clicks into the pattern as they're coming through the water. This is really, really hard because there's a moment where you lose sight of all the other swimmers on the team. Aim to have lots of on the surface pattern changes with some underwater pattern changes. If your team can handle it, put at least one in hybrid pattern change. And I will share with you a little bit later how that's changing internationally. And do not feel like you ever need to have an as surfacing pattern change. I'm not even sure why they do it internationally. Maybe it's because they want to get to the next pattern quicker to get to another part. I don't know. Anyways, so those are the 4 pattern changes I typically see. So an underwater pattern change, on the surface pattern change, in a hybrid pattern change, and very minimally as surfacing pattern change. Number 2, use variety in choreography of movements when repeating the same pattern. So there are some really great patterns that we love to just throw in our routine over and over again. Please make sure you use variety every time you use that pattern, okay? If you need some really good video examples of this, I highly recommend watching the Russian senior national team. They are fantastic at doing this. So we're gonna go through a commonly used pattern, 2 lines, and we're gonna see how we can use this different each time, okay? So we're gonna go through 4 different examples. So in fact, 2 lines happens to be one of the top 3 patterns used by international teams. This first time we do the 2 lines, we're gonna use it during a hybrid, so an in hybrid pattern change. So we have, first of all, the groups of 2, they pop out to make a 2-2-2. So this is all while underwater doing some type of hybrid figure. And then followed by the number 1s, they're gonna catch up into the pattern to make 2 lines going another way. So this whole thing happens in a hybrid pattern change. So very, very difficult. This is very common to see the teams going from 2 lines to 2-2-2, in fact, to 2 lines again, even sometimes repeating the same 2 lines with people going to a new position though. Almost like doing circles around each other. In this option, we could do a joined partner hybrid or even some arms, joined arms. So each of the boxes represents a different combinations of partners you could have. The partners have the same numbers. The partners could all go at the same time, or you could be creative and you could vary the timing. You need to do whatever makes sense based on the choreography you're doing. So on the far left, we have just kind of your regular partners, right? With the swimmer across from you. In the middle box, we have the people beside you are going to be your partner. And then in the last box, that one would be something maybe where you want an entry maybe to be cooler into a figure. So you do something joined and then, you know, maybe swimmers pairs 1 jump off somewhere, pairs 2, and then 3 and 4, they can go out. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to do, just again, always make sure it makes sense, okay? So that's the second option, is using a partner joined hybrid or arm strokes. Number 3, you could use the 2 lines with different synchronization options during a stroking section, body boost, or even to get into a hybrid. So these are not necessarily people doing things touching this time. This would be in the far left, so group 1 goes, then the group of 2 goes, and then the group of 3. And then the middle one, same thing. We have all the 1s are gonna do something at the same time, and then all the 2s. And then on the far right, we're gonna have the swimmers 1 do something together, 2, 3s together, and then 4s. With any of these options, you always need to make sure that visually it makes sense, okay? And there will always be better combinations with different moves, right? So you have to check out your moves sometimes a couple different ways until you know what the best version is with the timing, and then you can settle on that. Okay, this one's not that fancy, pretty simple. So this 2-line pattern could be used for a ballet-like type movement. where the swimmers 1 are facing swimmers 2. You could have them go all together. You could have the opposite lines doing moves. Perhaps they're doing tub position to something else. You just want to make sure whatever they're doing this time around, it's not the same as the other 3 times they've done it. Often in routines when they have 2 lines, it's an egg beater. It's always an egg beater. And it becomes predictable that, oh, I'm going to see 2 lines because they need a pattern change into a 2-2-2. I'm going to see 2 lines because, oh, they're going to go to a rocket. Okay, so really be aware that each time you do your 2 lines, you need to do something that sets it apart from the last time you did 2 lines, okay? Other patterns that are commonly used, rockets, 2-2-2s, again, make sure it could be something subtle, but just make sure it's a little bit different. As an added bonus, make sure that pattern doesn't show up in the exact same spot in the pool, because to me, that really stands out as lack of variety as well, okay? Whew, we're flying here. Thought this was going to take longer, but I don't think anyone needs to be here for 2 hours, so that's okay. My last consideration for you is a series of questions. Are the laps balanced in time? Are the laps balanced in number of patterns? Are the laps balanced in the number of pattern changes? I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the last FINA manual that came out, not the one we're currently working in, I haven't seen it in that one yet, it suggested that laps in the routine should be about 1 minute per lap. When I look at international routines, I often notice that they go about 1 minute to about 1:15 per lap, and that their last lap is about 30 seconds long. And so that makes for a routine of about 4 laps. The reason I like the balance in the time or the numbers is that it makes these routines easier to watch. I feel like the more the different aspects of the routine are balanced, the more flow and ease of viewing there is for the audience and the judges. I'm sure we can all think of routines where you're watching it and you keep thinking like, wow, that lap had a lot of highlights, or whoa, that lap didn't have very many patterns compared to number 1. These are the types of things, if you try and balance your routine, those thoughts won't come up because they're not there, right? I know it's common for, say, lap 1 to have lots of highlights. So just make sure that maybe there's more highlights, but maybe the time of the lap is balanced, right? I can think of an example a few years back where one international team had about, I don't know, probably 15 highlights. Maybe I'm exaggerating here, but their lap 1 was 1:30. So then when you watch the rest of the routine, it just felt unbalanced because they couldn't cover the pool as much. They couldn't get as many pattern changes in. Their laps felt shorter because in actuality, the time for those laps was shorter too, right? So again, think about the balance of your routines. Balancing, yeah, like I said, will make it more enjoyable. You can use this as a little bit of a checklist when you're doing your routine, right? So you can keep track of, okay, what do we got going on here? Whew. Okay, last section. We're flying. Okay, international trends. Here are my first 3 trends for you to note. So this is probably over, I'd say, the last 6 years, not just this last season, because the Olympics are coming up. So we might see some new things coming out of there. Point 1, underwater pattern changes from hybrids into highlights. I'm noticing more teams are going from a hybrid straight into a highlight. Yikes. So this is hard because of breath control. Be very strategic with this one because it could really affect your swimmer's energy levels afterwards. Just think about it. Most people, well, in a hybrid, everybody's underwater, and then to swim straight into a highlight, again, most people, if not everybody except for maybe one person, is underwater. So that could be a really long section underwater for your team. But I am noticing that's a trend that's happening. 2, multiple in hybrid pattern changes in the routine and during a hybrid, 3+. More teams are performing more hybrids that have in hybrid pattern changes, and that number is increasing. So a few years ago, if they had a hybrid, they would have done a maximum of 3 pattern changes while underwater performing that hybrid. Now, the minimum is 3, with the maximum I saw recently being 5 pattern changes in one hybrid. This is happening mostly in tech teams, but again, it's just a trend to watch out for, that there's more in hybrid pattern changes happening while during a hybrid. And a lot of the figures or hybrids in a routine have in hybrid pattern changes as well, okay? Do not do them though if your team is not strong enough to do it, right? You don't want to lose execution scores and have people in the wrong spot, because that can mess up synchronization as well, right? So this one is probably for the higher level swimmers to consider doing. Number 3, tech routines have less underwater pattern changes and they have more on the surface pattern changes. This one kind of shocked me. With the exception of getting into and out of highlights and getting in and out of hybrids, underwater pattern changes were quite low. In fact, most of the pattern changes were in hybrids or on the surface. So for your routines, thinking about how you can incorporate more on the surface pattern changes. Sometimes an example I can think of is a team sometimes will do like a body boost and go under and then do a pattern change. So that is not happening as much in tech routines internationally. It's literally they would do a body boost, maybe catch on the surface, pattern change, and then carry on. Okay, the next 3 trends that we'll cover, we're just going to go through 6. The 3-2-3 pattern is becoming more popular now. I see it making a push to get into that top 3 patterns with the 2 lines rocking and the 2-2-2. So just be aware that the 3-2-3 pattern is really, it's a great pattern. So you should think about incorporating that more. Number 5, at least 50% original patterns in your routine. You will actually need to analyze your patterns. I found internationally, most routines are, at least 50% of all of their patterns that you see will be the first time you see them. So when I watch it, if I see a 2-2-2, that counts as 1. But then if I see the 2-2-2 and the swimmers are on the opposite side, that's still a new pattern. But then once they start repeating it, then that's not an original pattern anymore. Same with a rocket, right? With a rocket, you can rotate it, 4 different ways in the pool, because that's still original, right? You can put the rocket on the angle. So being aware of that type of use of your patterns, right? Being original. So like we talked about with the 2 lines, not just always doing the 2 lines exactly the same. Maybe you're pivoting it to the angle, so it's just slightly different, right? And then last trend I wanted to point out to you was multiple synchronization options are being used. So lots of variety in synchronization options. In the past, it used to be, like group of 4 and group of 4, which I'm still seeing quite a bit of. On top of that, though, there's more creative uses. So if you're in a 2-2-2-2 pattern, might have said too many 2s there, you can always take advantage of the 2-4-2 pattern that's in there and have some synchronization options in there. You could take advantage of the 1-3-3-1. There's still, the groups of 2, the groups of 4. So thinking about your patterns differently than we typically would break them apart to show off more of the, the patterns that are in there and the synchronization options that you can do. Phew, I made it through in time. I was actually worried that maybe I talked too long on some of them. I hope I didn't rush this. But let's do a summary of what we covered, which was probably a lot today. Sorry. Pattern grids. Think about patterns and pattern changes happening on a giant grid that your swimmers are on top of. You want to use it to help you with the spacing of your swimmers and to help you figure out what the best pattern changes are. So sometimes if something is not working for a pattern in your routine, maybe it's you have swimmers doing a 4-position pattern after a highlight, or perhaps the pattern change is a 3-position pattern change because half of your team is moving 2 positions when they're only supposed to be moving half a position, okay? So think about the pattern grid to help you with your pattern problems in the pool. Use the 10 considerations that I've given you as a checklist for your choreography. We went through lots of pattern ideas, but ultimately, I think you could take the 10 considerations and then use them as a checklist this year. You could either have the checklist beside you at the pool and keep that in mind while you're choreographing, or you could actually, which I suggest, is map out your patterns before you start the year and then try to fit some of those ideas into your plans before you even hit the pool, okay? Lastly, compare the international trends with the level you swim at. Because you know what? They're not going to be applicable to everybody, especially if you coach beginners. My gosh, you probably should not be trying to do in hybrid pattern changes. That would just cause too much stress for you. You can compare them to what everybody else at your level is doing. Sometimes the trends are not going to be applicable to you. However, you could just use them to infuse some fun at practice. So the little guys are always wanting to do things that are way harder for them. So perhaps for fun, you're trying to do in hybrid pattern changes, right? Perhaps maybe for the older swimmers, they want to try and do like 3, 4, and 5, right? So you can have these challenges where at competition, they will not be able to execute them at a high level, but at practice, just to keep it fun and have variety, you could try, some of the different trends that are happening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate that you guys took time out of your day to watch this webinar. I wasn't really sure how long it would go, so I thought if I said an hour and a half and I went around an hour, I would be happy with that. I'll stick around afterwards and see if I can't grab some of the comments that maybe you guys have been writing down for me. If not, feel free. There's a couple ways if you want to stay connected. Or if you're interested in checking out my pattern book or my blog. So my website is theonlinesynchrocoach.com, or you can email me at vanessa@theonlinesynchrocoach.com. If you feel compelled to do so, once you're at the website, you can sign up for my newsletter. I promise you, I really don't email that much. I have the last couple days just because I wanted people to know about the webinar. And for signing up for the newsletter, you'll get sent some pattern changes for you to use at the pool. Also, for you folks that like to stay connected online more ways, you can check me out on Facebook, and you can also follow me on YouTube. I'm not even sure how this happens. I don't know if it stays on Google Hangouts or if it stays on YouTube, but I will be leaving the replay up until about July 11th when I get back from fun camping trip I'm going on. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the material. I think I'm going to make something for you guys to be able to use in the future. So anyways, if you need to watch it or you want to share it with other people, send them to YouTube or Google Hangouts. I'll send an email out too and let people know where you can catch the replay if you need to. Again, I would love to thank everybody for checking out this webinar. I hope it served you, and I really look forward to connecting with all of you guys in the future. Thank you.